10 November 1955. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, an abandoned ship was found, MV Joyita. Months earlier, it had departed with 25 people, but now there was no one inside the ship. The lights were still on, the radio was set to the last call. A doctor's bag was opened with bloody bandages inside. The clocks had all stopped at the same time. So, where had the 25 people gone? Why were all the lifeboats missing? And although the ship was almost impossible to sink, why was it found in such a condition? This is the unresolved story of Joyita, known as the Mary Celeste of the Pacific. MV Joyita was not originally built as a cargo or passenger vessel. In 1931, it was constructed as a luxury yacht for Hollywood's famous film director and producer Roland West. Its first name was Joyita, meaning Little Joy, dedicated to West's wife. The ship's first purpose was entirely civilian and leisurely. Private excursion yacht, sea trips for Hollywood circles, luxury tours along the Pacific coast. So at its birth, Joyita had no mystery, no trade, no cargo, no danger. It was a private yacht built entirely for wealth, comfort, and prestige. The turning point that changed Joyita's fate was World War II. A luxury yacht at first, the ship was taken into service by the US Navy when the war in the Pacific intensified and was completely separated from its civilian purpose. Throughout the war, Joyita was used for patrol duty, transport duty, medical transport, personnel and material transfer, light military tasks. It stopped being a luxury yacht and became almost a multi-purpose service vessel. In 1943, the ship suffered a serious accident and ran aground. Copper was strategically important at the time and materials were scarce. Therefore, the copper pipes in the engine room were removed and replaced with galvanized steel pipes. This is critical because copper is resistant to salt water. Galvanized pipes rust, crack, and perforate quickly in salt water. The Pacific has harsh conditions. Salt water constantly applies pressure. This charge became the main cause of the ship's later flooding problems. Over the years, the pipes corroded, small cracks and holes formed, and this caused the ship to slowly take on water. The pump system struggled to expel this water. In other words, the origins of Joyita becoming a ghost ship go back to this faulty wartime repair. By 1955, Joyita was no longer a leftover wartime vessel, but an old commercial cargo and passenger ship. In 1955, the ship's owner was Captain Thomas Dusty Miller. He was well known in the region, experienced but a risk taker. He personally captained the Joyita. Miller also understood engine work well, but he knew the ship's age and problems better than anyone. At that time, Joyita transported cargo between small islands, sometimes carried passengers, sometimes carried medical supplies or animal products, and was generally used on the inter-island trade route. On its final voyage in 1955, its mission was to carry medical supplies, commercial goods, and special cargo. It was no longer a luxury yacht, it had become a worn-out, aging workboat used in the daily economy of the region. On the morning of 3rd October 1955, Joyita set out on a routine inter-island trade trip, but its fate completely changed. Its route was about 420 kilometers from Peleliopos, Samoa, to the Tokelau Islands, Fakovo. Under normal conditions, this journey took 36 to 48 hours. There were 25 people on board Joyita, 16 passengers, a doctor, Dr. Alfred Bates Parsons, a government official, several business people traveling for trade, a mother and children, locals returning to Tokelau. The list was mixed, but most passengers were ordinary civilians. 9 crew members: Captain Dusty Miller, Engineer Chuck Lincoln, First Officer, cargo and deckhands. What was interesting on this voyage was Joyita's cargo. Bales of cork, the most critical element that made the ship unsinkable. Cork floats and ships carrying large amounts of cork are extremely difficult to sink completely. Empty fuel drums, another buoyant element. Empty drums float, so they had a balancing effect on the ship's weight. Medical supplies were another type of cargo. The doctor's equipment, treatment materials, some emergency medicines. As for commercial cargo, bags of cement, local trade goods, some special order materials. On this final voyage, Joyita was carrying a mixed load of passengers, cargo and emergency supplies. Joyita was supposed to reach Tokelau on 5th October, but it never arrived. At first, Tokelau officials thought the weather might be bad, the ship was just delayed. But after 2 days with no news, suspicions grew. On 7th October 1955, an official alert was issued. A search operation was launched by the Royal New Zealand Air Force, RNZAF. Additionally, Samoan authorities, Tokelau officials, and several commercial ships in the Pacific joined the search. The operation covered a very large area. For 6 days, a wide region of the Pacific was searched intensely by air and sea. The area was so large that teams had to scan the same zones multiple times. During the searches, not a single piece of the ship, not a lifeboat, not a barrel, not even a wooden plank was found. This suggested 2 possibilities. Either the ship had drifted far away to a different area, or it had not sunk and was still afloat, but all the people had vanished. The truth would appear a month later. Exactly 5 weeks after the disappearance, on 10th November 1955, a commercial airline pilot spotted a drifting ship far off course in the middle of the Pacific, Joyita. At its location, it was drifting toward Fiji, far from its original route, almost as if it had begun an entirely different journey. This distance showed that the ship had drifted aimlessly for weeks. When the pilots saw Joyita was in a sinking posture but had not sunk. Its hull was about 4 steps above the waterline. It was heavily listed to the port side. Its engines were completely silent. The most important detail: the ships remained afloat despite everything. Yet there was no sign of life. When the ship was examined, first, the radio was on, but the antenna was broken. The radio was fixed on an emergency frequency, but the antenna cable was cut. This meant the captain had tried to call for help, but the signal never went out. Second, the clocks had all stopped at the same time. 3 crew pocket watches and the captain's wall clock all had stopped at 10:25, a critical time marker almost eerie. Third, bloody gauze and the doctor's bag were found. An emergency treatment had been started, but the patient was unknown. Fourth, missing belongings. Most passengers' personal items were gone. Suitcases and private belongings were missing. This suggested people had left the ship in a hurry and intentionally. The lifeboats were also missing. All 3 lifeboats that should have been aboard were gone. Additionally, navigation instruments were missing. Captain Miller's pistol was missing, and some navigation logs were gone. This led to clear possibilities. People had abandoned the ship, this was certain. But why, and where did they go? Once Joyita was found, the case was too complex to be closed quickly. New Zealand authorities launched a comprehensive maritime investigation. The investigation was conducted between late 1955 and early 1956 by the New Zealand Maritime Court. Experts involved: ship engineers, Navy technicians, legal advisors, ship inspectors. The goal was simple. Why did Joyita take on water? Why was no one on board, and why had the ship not sunk? The inspection revealed several critical issues. First, the pipes were rotten and perforated. The galvanized pipes installed during the war had completely corroded. This caused slow but significant flooding of the engine room. Second, the pump system was not working. The first pump's belt had snapped. The backup pump was airlocked, so water could not be expelled. Third, fuel leakage. One of the fuel tanks had cracked, causing the engines to stop. These were the main problems. But one of the strangest findings, Joyita was technically unsinkable because of cork inside the hull, empty fuel drums, and its structural design. Therefore, even if the ship completely floated inside, the hull still had enough buoyancy. In fact, when it was found, nearly 80% of the hull was filled with water, yet it was still afloat. This created a dead end for investigators. There was no reason to abandon the ship. The official report could not explain for major mysteries. Why was no one on board? The ship was known to be unsinkable. Why was no distress signal transmitted? The antenna cable was cut, sabotage or storm damage? Who did the bloody bandages belong to? Someone was injured, but who? Why were the lifeboats missing? Where did they go, and why didn't they return? The most striking line in the report was, there was no reason that justified abandoning the vessel. This became the key point that turned Joyita into a ghost ship legend. The first theories that emerged were the classic assumptions. However, even these simple theories made the situation darker the more they were examined. First, accident and panic theory. This was the earliest and, on the surface, the most reasonable explanation. According to the claim, Joyita had pushed the crew into panic because of the flooding problem in the engine room. When the engine stopped and the water level rose, they supposedly thought the ship was sinking. The crew and passengers boarded the lifeboats and abandoned the ship in haste. Problem: Joyita was an unsinkable ship. Its hull was made of massive balsa wood, and even if it took on water, it was guaranteed to stay afloat. Therefore, the panic theory collapsed from the start. Second, piracy or armed attack theory. When the ship was found, the bloody bandages, the complete disappearances of all lifeboats, the cut radio cables, and the missing valuable cargo made many people think of the possibility of an attack. The idea is this. The ship was stopped by a gang, smugglers, or coastal pirates. The passengers and crew were killed or taken away, and the ship was left on its own. Problem: there were no bullet marks, no signs of struggle, or no clear scene of violence. Third, flooding plus navigation failure, technical malfunction theory. Some experts said Joyita was a ship that had not been properly maintained for years. It was known that the engines had broken down many times. The radio cables appearing cut, according to some, was actually a repair attempt. In other words, the ship was the victim of a chain of technical failures. Problem: why would technical malfunctions force the crew to completely abandon the ship, especially when the ship was not capable of sinking? Fourth, doctor's cabin theory, early speculation. According to this theory, the doctor on board, Alfred Doc Parsons, was dealing with a medical emergency. The bloody bandages on the ship supposedly belonged to him. It was claimed that an injury, illness, crisis, or medical panic might have put the crew under stress and caused the situation to spiral out of control. Problem: this scenario is too weak to explain the complete abandonment of the ship. Fifth, government or commercial secrets theories, early wave of conspiracies. Among the cargo were valuable medical supplies, radio parts, and commercial goods. Some argued Joyita might have been involved in smuggling, Cold War intelligence activity, or a secret transportation mission. Problem: no concrete evidence was ever found. As the question and lack of answers continued, David Wright became one of the researchers who re-examined the MV Joyita case years later. His theory is one of the explanations that tries to create the most coherent logic chain around the event. First, according to Wright, the starting point, engine failure plus flooding. Wright accepts that Joyita would not sink thanks to its fireproof balsa hull. However, he believes the ship drifted uncontrollably for a long time due to critical engine malfunctions. When some pipes broke, water filled the engine room, which worried the crew. Up to this point, there is a technical criticism, but the breaking point appears in what happened next. Second, Wright's main claim. The crew was not kidnapped but misled. According to Wright, the crew did not willingly abandon the lifeboats. The radio operator did not cut the cables. During an urgent repair attempt, the radio had already become unusable. When the ship became uncontrollable, the crew might have believed they saw another vessel nearby and used the lifeboats to go toward and they thought was help. This resembles optical illusions or stress-induced misjudgments seen in other ghost ship cases. Third, missing items and bloody bandages on Joyita, Wright's explanation. Wright interprets the dramatic-looking traces as follows. Bloody bandages, not a major attack but an accident or injury. For example, someone might have been hurt when a mechanical part collapsed. All missing lifeboats, instead of a mass escape. Wright sees this as the crew moving toward a light or vessel they mistakenly believed could have. Damage to the antenna or cut cables. According to him, the cables were damaged not due to an attack, but during an attempt to repair an electrical fault or broken radio. Missing cargo. Wright says this wasn't piracy. Lighter packages could have floated away and drifted off with the current. These interpretations strip the dramatic details of their attack-like appearance. Fourth, Wright's main idea. According to him, what happened on Joyita was not murder, assault, or a secret operation. The crew was simply caught in a chain of wrong decisions. Their reason for abandoning the ship was the following. Even though the ship would not sink, the crew believed it was sinking. In Wright's view, Joyita was not a tragedy, but a case of profound misperception and technical helplessness. David Wright is a maritime historian and researcher who re-examined the MV Joyita mystery years later. He is one of the people who conducted the most comprehensive modern studies on Joyita, particularly focusing on missing ships, ghost ships, and maritime accidents in Pacific region. What makes him important in the MV Joyita case is his specialization in Pacific ghost ships. Wright systematically studied disappearances around the Pacific Islands during the mid-20th century. To solve the Joyita case, he collected technical reports as well as records from sailors of the period who had witnessed similar events. He examined photographs of the ship, maintenance records, salvage documents, maritime archives, and the 1955 investigation files, presenting the case not as a simple mystery file, but as a combination of engineering issues and human error. In other words, he presented an engineering-based explanation against the popular conspiracy theories. While at the time, the event was surrounded by theories of piracy, kidnapping, and state secrecy. Wright offered a more grounded scenario with points such as engine failures, the buzzer hull's unsinkable nature, wrong decisions, radio cables damaged during repair attempts. Wright analysis is still cited as a reference in many publications on maritime safety, ghost ships, and unexplained maritime events. But even though the theory is logical, there are parts that still don't add up. First, it is very illogical for a professional crew to abandon an unsinkable ship. Most of the crew were experienced. These people knew Joyita had a balsa hull. So, the most critical part of the theory, they believed the ship was sinking, doesn't look very realistic. Second, it is very strange for all lifeboats to be used at the same time. In an abandonment procedure, some people stay on the ship, some live with lifeboats. On Joyita, no one stayed behind. This is not normal for an experienced team. Third, for 25 people and 4 lifeboats to completely disappear is extremely unlikely. For so many people and such large lifeboats to vanish without a trace, without washing ashore or being seen contradicts the theory. 4. The antenna and radio damage looks like an accident and more like a deliberate cut. Wright says it was a repair attempt, but some experts argue the angle of the cuts appears clean as if made by scissors or a knife. Fifth, missing valuable cargo. The suspicion of looting is still strong. Among the medical equipment, medicines, and radio parts, the most valuable ones were missing. The weapons, the current swept them away argument. Sixth, the rudder being locked in a specific direction. Some reports claim the rudder was fixed in a certain position during drift. This strengthens claims of mechanical sabotage or deliberate steering. After Joyita was found as a ghost ship in 1955, its story didn't end. On the contrary, the ship continued causing problems for years, almost like a cursed object. Joyita hadn't completely sunk, so it was hauled ashore again. The water accumulated in the hull was pumped up, the engine was renewed, the cabins and deck were repaired, and the electrical system was completely replaced. In 1956, it was technically seaworthy again after repairs. However, because of the scandal, no one kept the ship for long. Its frightening reputation also made its price drop. Everyone who bought it soon tried to sell it again, saying it's causing trouble for me. So Joyita changed hands 3 or 4 times within a few years. Despite being repaired, Joyita constantly took on water. Its engine was unreliable. Its electrical system malfunctioned repeatedly. New problems appeared even during routine maintenance. It was as if the boat did not want to float. Among sailors, the following phrase has spread: Joyita is not a boat, it's a collection of troubles. By the late 1950s, no one wanted to use Joyita as a cargo vessel anymore. Damage, malfunctions, and its bad reputation combined, and the ship was completely withdrawn from commercial service. After its life as a floating cargo ship ended, Joyita was put ashore and its hull was used for years as a lumber and metal workshop. Its cabins, rooms, and engine room were completely dismantled. The ship no longer had its ghost ship form. It was just a warehouse. Joyita's remains were abandoned in Fiji throughout the 1970s and 80s. Sun, humidity, and termites consumed its balsa hull. Eventually, the ship became completely unusable and decayed into nothing. Today, no intact hull pieces remain. In short, even after Joyita became a ghost ship, it was not left alone. It was repaired, sold, tested, but it never returned to normal. It was as if the ship had lost its soul, along with those 25 people who vanished in 1955. Even today, the fate of 25 people cannot be clearly classified as missing, dead, or survivors. The final report of the investigation conducted in 1955 was very short and disturbingly vague. The government's official statement was, "The ship has been abandoned. The fate of the crew and passengers is unknown." There was no other definitive statement. No declaration of death, no recovered bodies, no cause of accident, nothing. Normally, when 25 people disappear from a ship, a maritime court must be established, criminal procedures for negligence must begin, insurance inspections should be conducted, and company executives must be questioned. In the Joyita case, none of this was fully carried out, because the ship did not sink, so it couldn't be classified as an accident. There was no clear evidence to accuse anyone. As since no bodies were found, it wasn't even processed as death. Thus, the case remained a disappearance that fell into a legal void. For years, the families heard only this: their fate could not be determined. Many of them were officially declared dead only 10 years later, and only upon the family's own request. There was no compensation, no apology, no explanation from the government. Between 1956 to 1960, several families and independent researchers requested that the case be reopened. But due to lack of evidence, absence of witnesses, and the fact that Joyita's hull had changed over time, the process never progressed. However, the media frequently reported the event under the headline "Pacific's Mary Celeste." This comparison ensured that the file entered popular culture permanently, and it is not an unfair comparison. Both Mary Celeste and Joyita were found still floating in good condition, but inside there was not a single person. No bodies, no signs of struggle, and no explanatory note. This turns both events into collective disappearance cases. Let us note that we will be making a Mary Celeste documentary very soon as well. If you wish to conduct your own research, you can look at compilation documentaries such as Ghost Ships and Legendary Ships. Some of the books we use may also help. One of the comprehensive historical and technical studies of the MV Joyita case, Joyita, Solving the Mystery, David G. Wright. Researcher Wright examines the case from beginning to end, discusses various theories, and reveals the still unsolved points, as we mentioned earlier. Our other recommendation is the Joyita Mystery, Robin Malcolm, 1962. One of the early books that tells the details of the case with a classic investigative novel approach. It includes both real records and speculation together. Finally, we recommend Without Trace, The Last Voyage of 8 Ships, John Harris. In this book, which covers multiple mysterious maritime events, Joyita is included in this context. The story of the 25 people who vanished in the silent waters of the Pacific still stands before us like an unanswered question. Joyita was a ship known not to sink, yet its crew left it to an unknown darkness. Its radio cables were cut, valuable cargo was missing, and the ship reappeared 600 kilometers away, as if it had been pulled out of time and dragged back in. What really happened at the sea that day? Panic, an attack, or something much darker? Nobody knows the answer anymore, and perhaps we never will. Joyita continues its journey, not in the ocean this time, but in the depths of our minds. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on the notifications bell, and share your thoughts. See you in the next mysterious case. Goodbye.